Good afternoon, and welcome to the second in a series of videos to help you acquaint yourself with some significant pieces of art from the Southeast Asian region of the ancient world. We're going to be looking at the second half, I believe, of the 5th century. Yeah, second half of the 5th century. As today I once again use unconventional materials to represent for you an introduction to the seated Buddha preaching the first sermon. The actual work of art with conventional materials is right here. And you'll notice that right next to it on the same page is a very similar work of art. Different in style, different in location, and slightly different in the creation time. But it's an image that you will see repeated throughout the art of the Buddhist tradition. For our purposes, we're going to kind of look mostly at the symbolic elements so that you might be able to do just a visual analysis of the piece. Alright, so here we go. The seated Buddha preaching the first sermon. Significantly, you would notice the position of the Buddha and its representation. Keep in mind that early in the Buddhist tradition, the actual physical form of the Buddha was not represented. There would be symbolic representation or symbols left to indicate the presence of the Buddha as if the Buddha had been there, such as a footprint or perhaps the wheel. In some cases, you might just see the body tree that was often associated with the representation of the Buddha. But as time went on, the people sort of demanded. The people wanted an image to which they could worship. And so images began to appear. At first, you might have seen the Buddha with very heavy robes, almost similar to a classical tradition, but the robe would have completely covered the Buddha. A lot of draping, very heavy draping, across the Buddha's body. You did not see much of the physical form. You saw more of the folds and the way the pleats sort of hung on the body. That would have been referred to as the Gandharan version of the Buddha. Then that was followed by the Mathuran version, where it was a much more translucent material, not such a heavy robe, still very much draped, but this time mostly over one shoulder. And there was a much fuller, supple body to the Buddha. The positioning was still very much in a meditative state. You would have seen the body in this position and the drapery over one shoulder, Mathuran style. That was followed by a much more, I can't say sophisticated, but a very smooth look, a very tight look. The draping or the clothing of the Buddha was more like just what I'm wearing. It was sort of tight-fitting, almost invisible, and it represented the fact that the physical form, the body, was what was important, not the clothing on top of it. So you see like indications of clothing, like a neckline or a sleeve or an end of a legging of sorts, but very little else. The ornamentation is sort of kind of removed from the body. In the seated Buddha preaching the first sermon, it would be from the Guptan style. Gupta is the Gupta, and then when you refer to it as an adjective, it'd be the Guptan style with an N. So, taking that position, you would see the Buddha, this was my best attempt, in sort of what we refer to as a yogic position or a yoga-like position. And the hands become very important. The hands are positioned in such a way to communicate a message, and those are called mudras. The mudras are different based on the meaning they convey. One hand over the other like this has a certain meaning. In the case of this work of art that we're looking at, you see something where, I believe it is the right hand is up, palm outward, and the other hand has the index finger and thumb connected. This together meaning wheel of law and knowledge, and this being the do not be afraid symbol. So he is seated, hands in this position, very relaxed shoulders, and eyes in a downcast form, so that we believe him to be in a meditative state. Alright, but there's more. See if I can sit back a tiny bit. beneath the Buddha, you would see the representation of the wheel. Maybe I can do it this way in the couch. No. It's tilted downward, sort of, so you get the sense of its roundness. I'm not going to be able to do it on this soft surface, but it would be half the circle is represented sticking out from beneath the Buddha. And then under that part, underneath the bench on which he is seated, you would see two deer forms with the wheel of law between them. Right? So it's represented something like something like this. And the two deer actually stand for Deer Park, which is not the school right around the corner that we always beat in football, but Deer Park being the area in India where this sculpture is placed. See if I can get it. So that would be sort of down here beneath the Buddha's body. Some other significant features, though, are part of this work of art. To the side of the Buddha, you would see a representation of the Bodhi tree. So, let's see if we can put that in place. And the Bodhi tree is, from history, a representation of the Buddha in a symbolic form prior to when they actually had a physical form. And what else did I want to put? Oh yeah, the fun one. Behind the Buddha is also a significant form. It's called a nimbus. In a more Christian tradition, it would be referred to as a halo, but a very large circle placed behind the body. Oh, I don't know if you can see it very well. Anyway, big piece of glass. But around this very large circle, you would see 2 or 3 small figures. Those are called bodhisattvas, and they're kind of interesting. I think they're kind of interesting. Let me clip my one bodhisattva on this side, and then you would see another over here, and they sort of hover above the Buddha. There we go. The bodhisattvas are believed to be Buddhists that have reached that state of enlightenment, but have stopped just short of nirvana to stay behind and help others to get there. So they are referred to as Buddha's helpers. So we have the bodhisattvas, the Bodhi tree, the wheel of law, down here beneath the Buddha, and the Deer Park representation so far. What else do we need? Let me get into position and hope I don't spill the plant. I think I've covered everything. Alright, so in my yogic posture, there would be a representation of a wheel on the bottom of my foot in many of the Buddha poses. You will notice that I cannot turn my foot completely upside down like it does in the statue, facing upward. But I'm doing the best I can. Ooh, might make it. So the wheel would be on the bottom of my foot. My hand would be in the position of do not be afraid, and knowledge, what was it? Knowledge and learning. Oh, let me check really quick. It was an interesting combination. Where's the explanation? Buddhism and Buddhist iconography. Oh, sure. The wheel of law and teaching, not knowledge. So the wheel of law and teaching. The wheel of law and teaching in my hand position. And do not be afraid of the wheel of law and teaching. So this position like this. And the downcast eyes in a meditative state. This is what it looks like for the seated Buddha preaching the first sermon at Sarnath.